society has to treat it. I'm going to play this game to the last Mexican, to the last inner city kid. You know, that's what it's gotten us morally. Now, on a juvenile level, these kids are growing up in these free fire zones where every single industry, again, listen to Wall Street, they're telling you how to maximize profit. Every single factory in Baltimore, Allied Steel, Bethlehem Steel, American Standard, Koppers, all of it, gone, 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 gone. We don't need you anymore. We don't need the working class. We don't need the people who had union wages. We don't need to pay union wages. We're going overseas for that. Those factories are in Matamoros in Singapore. Again, the market had an answer, and we listened to it. And we listened to it with all our hearts and minds. And so those jobs are gone. And the only industry that exists in places like West Baltimore or North Philadelphia is the drug trade. And we met a lot of kids when we went to the corner. Most of them are dead now. A couple are in prison, but most of them are dead. The last one, there's one right now that's working a minimum wage job and trying to stay clean. The rest of them are either drug addicted on the corner, of which there are 2. I'm taking a list of 8 kids who are the main characters in the corner. 2 are on the corner right now. 1's working. 3 are dead. The others are in prison. The last one just died of an overdose a month ago. So that's an attritive rate of childhood that approaches the genocidal. They weren't fools, any of them. They were not stupid children. They were undereducated. They were without resources. Their family dynamic was terrifying. But we didn't meet a lot of fools. We met a lot of ordinary kids growing up in an extraordinary environment who basically looked around their neighborhood and their parents and their older brothers and their older sisters had gone to the corner because the corner was the only place hiring. It was the only part of the America and the economic compact that says we all share in this together that actually had a branch office in their neighborhood. Nothing else existed. And the school system that trained them pretended that they were training them for our America, but of course they weren't. That part of the tax base ran to the counties. This is the America that you left behind and said, we don't need you anymore. And they're not fools. They get it. They understood that they were supposed to go to the corner, and they did. They played by the odds as you laid them out, and they've suffered those odds. And so by the time they hit the juvenile system, they had learned every rule you could learn for the corner. Now, we were making fun of Newt Gingrich a moment ago, and I like that, of course. You know, there's not a lot that Newt and I share, but Newt actually had one moment of absolute clarity in his comments about inner city kids. He said something that was right at the edge of absolute truth. Of course, in applying it, he became Newt Gingrich again. But he said something that was just beautiful, which he said was, these kids, and by this wrongly he meant the children of the poor, they've never seen a work environment other than illegality. That was his comment. Now, first of all, he's wrong on the numbers, and the New York Times op-ed actually ripped them apart correctly because most of the working poor are the working poor, and the children have been exposed to a work ethic that doesn't yield legitimate results because of the way in which we treat our workers in this country. So he was wrong on that. But when he got down to discussing the children of the underclass, the children of the people who inhabit the forgotten inner cores of our cities, he was on to something. These kids had not been trained for the actual work environment that we know is work. Those factories don't exist. Those jobs don't exist in West Baltimore. They were trained for the factory that does exist. And Newt is right about this one thing, which is, you know, we often talk about the drug culture. And it's like when we say it, we think like that's the bong on your coffee table, or that's the lines of Coke on the mirror, or the drug culture is the drugs. No, it's the culture. You know, when that's your industry, when you start thinking in the same way about the corner industry, the same way people growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, or Dundalk, Maryland in 1950 thought about the steel industry, because that's who's hiring. When you start thinking about the factory in those terms, when you think about the mine and the union, and you're living in West Virginia, when that's your culture, it's your culture. It affects everything that you think about it. Well, how do you get a job on a drug corner? And how do you keep a job? You get and keep a job on the drug corner if you're one of the smarter and more aggressive kids in the neighborhood. They'll take anybody, they'll hire anybody, but the kids that actually have a decent run, meaning 2 or 3 years at best, they're the ones who actually have some moxie, who have some flex, who understand and learn the work environment. And what the work environment of a drug corner tells you, and it is a factory, and they are hiring, is it tells you all the things you need to learn to survive in that industry, which is very different from our work culture as we understand the work culture. I knew some hard-working kids on those drug corners, and certainly some hard-working adults. Their jobs were a lot harder than mine as I stood around with a notepad watching them for a year. But it taught you certain things that will stand you in no good stead except in that industry, which is to say, if the count comes up light, it's not your fault. You don't take responsibility. You never do that on a drug corner. It's somebody else's fault. Count comes up light. You didn't steal. Somebody else stole. Count comes up light. It's not your problem. It's somebody else. Somebody accuses you of something. You don't say, thanks, I hear you. You're my supervisor. I'll try to do better next time. You say, fuck no, I didn't do it. And to hell with you for even saying I did. Somebody tries to take something from you, you fight, because if you don't fight, they'll be back the next day. It teaches you things that make you utterly unemployable should America ever come to you and say, oh, by the way, that part where we separated you from the social and economic compact, we're going to change that now. We're going to actually let you in somewhere. We're going to retrain you for something else. I can't tell you how many kids I've tried to hire that I knew growing up from that book. I mean, they were growing up, from working on the corner, tried to hire them once we had a television show in town. The numbers that were able to actually transition to showing up every day and to responding to the idea of a career that was supposed to go longer than 8 months or until they locked you up, or who was supposed to have bosses who were actually looking out for your welfare a little bit, or to the idea that you pay into the union and the union protects your work environment. These things, they learned the exact opposite. They worked in an industry that was the exact opposite of what our culture claims it values in terms of work and in terms of employment. So Newt was actually onto a little something, which is this. They're not fools, and they have one factory still open. One factory. If you think that's hyperbolic, look at this last week where Wall Street got such good and warm news about the unemployment rate, finally dipped below 9, naturalized unemployment, only because 315,000 people stopped looking for work. That's how we measure statistics in this country at this point. The idea that you can work within this structure, that you can fine-tune it, that you can find some change from within, I can't embrace that. That's not to exclude your responsibility for trying to do just that if you happen to work within the juvenile justice system or in the justice system. But I can only tell you from somebody who's just an external observer, I've reached the other point. And I guess we can take questions on this and argue happily, which is this. I no longer don't believe in the drug war. I actually believe that until the system begins to choke on itself, until the amount of marginalized lives becomes so profound that even we can't ignore it anymore, that real change is impossible. Real change is impossible. And here's why. There is no monetization. There's no equation that can make these lives we're talking about of value to the economy as we've constructed it. There's no profit to be had in pulling them back into our America. There's only cost. I know that everyone wants to think that if you do things right, there's a profit. There's even people, nothing warms my heart more than a liberal, but There are liberals who will tell you that environmentally, we can create jobs by protecting the environment. That all we need to do is graft on all these green principles to how we live, and the economy will actually benefit. Bullshit. Protecting the planet costs money. It's expensive. It's much easier to trash the planet. It's much easier. It's much cheaper. You'll make more money trashing the planet. It costs. And in the same way, it's also going to cost our society to take the 10 and 15 and maybe even at this point 20% of our country that's been divorced from our economy and saying, you are still Americans, we either rise or fall together, you are part of our world. And by that I'm referring to everybody who's trapped in this war on drugs, and in that sense probably at least half, probably 75% of the people in the juvenile justice system. In order to say to them, we're going to share our social and economic compact with you, we're going to share our future, we would have to lay out a lot of money and a lot of cost, and we would have to actually, dare I say it, share. And I don't know that we have the stomach for that. Certainly there's no money in it, so there's no way Wall Street can privatize that and find a profit in it. And if we can't find a profit in it, what have we done in the last 30 years that has achieved anything? That's the terror. That's the great terror. So at this point, the only thing you can do is get up every day and be a little more human and try to do the right thing. And if there's a kid in front of you, yes, work that case, try to save that kid, try to keep that kid out of the system. It's better than getting up and throwing your arms in the air and walking away. I'm not suggesting that. But for the mass of us as Americans, what we have to now do is in some way and on some practical basis take the impulse that is out there with the Occupy Wall Street, with dissent, and basically saying, I will no longer play by these rules. I will no longer play by these rules. Again, I began as a police reporter. Some of my best friends are police in Baltimore. I say that without shame. I have a great affection for good police work. But if you pick me to be on a jury for a nonviolent drug offense, I'm voting to nullify that jury. I don't care how much drugs you tar that person with. I don't care what the testimony is. If there's no violence attached to that, I'm not playing by your rules anymore, to quote the great Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. One of the great philosopher kings of our society. Because ultimately, it's the tinkering with a system that is utterly corrupt at its core. These are economic crimes if they are indeed crimes. There's no other factory in West Baltimore, and you've trained the kids at such an ineffective level that only 20 to 30% of the kids are graduating with a high school degree from Baltimore City, and that doesn't mean they're literate, and the jobs are 3 counties away or 2 counties away, and you've cut public transportation for the last 10 years, and you're bitching because he walked down to the corner to make some money? Really? Really? Wow. I'm not playing by that anymore. It's amazing if a kid walks away from a drug corner. It's a rite of passage in Baltimore. It's what you do to make some pocket money. It's what you do to get fed. It's what you do to get fed. And it is utterly devoid, and we are utterly devoid, of a legitimate right to moralize on it. You pay for the right to moralize as a society. If you want to stand there and moralize about drugs and about the economic underpinnings of the drug trade in the inner city, put up or shut up. Either incorporate them legitimately in your economy and give them an absolute choice where there's something that they actually were supposed to say yes to as opposed to just say no, or shut up and keep walking. And at this point, since I can't basically offer this to anybody in West Baltimore, when I'm asked to judge them, I'm basically saying, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to keep walking. I don't live in your America. My America doesn't comport to your America. I have options and realities that you don't have. So the idea that I'm going to sit here and suggest to you that you should sit on your stoop and starve rather than go down to that corner is absurd. And the idea that I'm going to offer you and offer some company that's going to go to Wall Street and say, you know what, we can make 6 or 7% more profit this year and tell that to an analyst, because the service we provide is incarcerative or pretrial detention or at-home detention, and that's our product. And I think we're in a growth industry, and I think we can make your number. To have that going on behind the backs of these children is just offensive beyond words. So I'm not playing anymore. And I tell every group I speak to, do not play. Do not walk away from this. The drug war is America's greatest moral failure at this point. It serves nobody. It does nothing of merit, and it is a triumph of brutality. So on that happy note, I'll take questions. Yeah. All right.